Welcome to Introduction to Music Fundamentals B. This video is about the technique of transposition. Now, just to clarify two terms which are very close in sound, we are dealing with transposition, and you have already done in class some transcribing. The difference between the two is quite important. Remember that transcribing is when you hear music and you write it down, or when you see music in another format and you transcribe it into a different format. So for example, if you're working with something like tonic solfa, you can transcribe it into staff notation. Transposition is something slightly different, and so let's have a look at what that is. Transposing in music refers to moving notes up or down a determined intervallic interval. What that really means is that we're taking a particular part of music and we're moving it up or we're moving it down. But the important thing is that if we're transposing a particular passage of music, all of the notes have to go at exactly the same distance to be transposed correctly. So, for example, you might be asked to transpose a melody up an octave. You already know what an octave is. So let's say you're working with the note E at the bottom of the treble clef on the first line. If we transpose it up an octave, it goes to the highest space of the stave. E going up an octave is going up 8 notes. Okay, so if we asked to transpose a melody up an octave, it means that not only the first note, but all of the notes of the passage must go up 8 notes. Okay, so we're going to see how to do that with an example, because it's actually quite simple, but it just needs some practice. Also to note that at this point in your training, you're only going to be asked to transpose up or down an octave. At a later stage, you'll need to be able to transpose at different intervals as well. So let's have a look at your screen now and the question that you have on the screen. It says transpose the melody up 1 octave, keep the notes on the same stave. And so we have already a clue that we're working with the treble clef and we have to stay in the treble clef. In our next transposition example, you'll see that we're going to move to a different clef. In this one, we're going to stay in the treble clef. And we're taking up the notes an octave. Now, let's look at some important parts of this particular example. You'll see that there is a key signature. It has 3 flats. 3 flats indicates E flat major. Okay, so let's have a look at the first few notes. Let's name each of the notes. The first note is E flat. The second note is G. The third note is B flat. Then we've got A flat, G, F, E flat. Altogether 7 notes. We've got to take, according to this question, we have to take each of these notes up 8 steps. So let's have a look at how we could do this. The first step is to make sure that you are in the right clef and that you've got the right first note. So let's look at the screen again. You'll see that the first note of the original melody is the E, or the E flat that is, on the bottom line of the treble clef. If we take that up an octave, if we count 8 notes up, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, we'll get to E again. That's the quality of the music alphabet, that if you go up 8 notes, you get to the same letter name, but up or down an octave. So we're going up an octave. The next E, up an octave, is in the top space. And you'll see that I've written that out on the screen. So look at the first one. There's an E at the bottom of the stave. In the second one, there's an E at the top of the stave. So now we know what the starting note of our example is going to be. Okay, that's up an octave. Step 2 is to write down each of the names of the notes underneath each note of the original example. So if we go back to the original example, what you would do there is write under each note what it is. So the first one is E flat, the second one is G, the third one is B flat. That helps you when you are transposing up an octave to make sure that each of the notes that you've taken up an octave is the right note. So let's have a look at this now when we see how it should look. Look at the screen and you'll see that I've put the original melody up at the top in green, quite small. And then I've shown you what the answer should look like underneath with little arrows going to each note. Okay, we've already worked out what the first note is, an E flat. We know, having worked out all of the notes beforehand, that the second note is a G. It's also got to go up an octave. The next G on the stave is all the way at the top of the stave, above the top line. So you can see that the second note where the arrow points now is above the top line. Then we have a B flat, and that goes all the way up to a ledger line. You can see that in the third one. Now, if we continue going through each note step by step, it should work out fairly simply if you have worked out what each of the letter names or the note names is. Then you can make sure that the note name that you have put up an octave is correct. If we look at this, the bottom example, we can check if all the notes are right. The first one is an E flat, second is G, third is B flat, fourth is A flat, fifth is G, sixth is F, and the seventh is E flat. That now equates to the first melody, but this one is up rather than down. So there's a very simple example, but not all of the examples that you'll be working with are that simple. So let's look at a slightly different one. Here is a second example where we are transposing the melody down an octave from the treble clef into the bass clef. So this time we're working with two different clefs. We're starting with the treble clef and we're moving into the bass clef. So let's look at step one. Step one, when we're asked to transpose a melody up or down an octave and into another clef, first transpose the first note of the example in the correct direction in the original stave. So let's stay in the treble clef for the moment. We look at the first A, we've got to take it down an octave. Okay, that means that we're going to drop below the treble clef. And you'll see that I've written there the second A, just underneath, down an octave, is on the second ledger line. Okay, now that we know what the note is in the treble clef that we need to start on, step two is to take it into the bass clef. So there it is. Calculate what the note is on the new stave. Okay, so an A below the treble clef, or on the second line of the second ledger line of the treble clef, is the same as the bass clef top line. Okay, there are both A's. And you might ask, how on earth did you get to that? So let's have a look at how I got there. You'll remember that middle C in the treble clef is just under the stave, and middle C is also in the bass clef just above the stave. Those are the same notes. So if you look at the screen now, you'll see exactly the same note written in different clefs. Now let's work out what the next note down would be. So B in the treble clef, just underneath that middle C, is the same as B in the bass clef, just under middle C. Those are exactly the same notes, just in different clefs. Okay? And now let's look at the A that we've just been working with. There's A underneath the treble clef. It is the same as A on the bass clef. So now you can see how I got to that particular point. We now know what the first note of our exercise has to be in the bass clef. Now, step 3 is to write out all of the names of the notes underneath each note. And I've done it there for you. If you look on the screen, you'll see the first note is A, then we've got G sharp, then A, B, C sharp, D, and E. Now, the important thing in this example is that sometimes you're going to be asked to write the answer without the key signature, which means that you'll need to put in the sharps or the flats, depending on what the key signature is, in by hand. Okay, so that's why I recommend that you even put in G sharp and C sharp and so forth, so that you know when you are transposing And if you have to do it without a key signature, you know that you need to add the sharps in. Okay, so now we've done step 3. Let's see what step 4 is. Now we are going to write out all of those notes down into the bass clef, all of them. Okay, so we knew that the first one was A, and we worked out what that A was. The second note is G sharp. You see I've written it in there, G sharp. It goes down just a semitone from the A. Then we go back to the A. So we've got to go back to that first note, then B, then C sharp, D, and E. Okay, do you see that, for example, in the bass clef now, this is an octave lower than the original treble clef example that we had, but it even goes above the clef, and that will happen quite often when you are transposing. So don't worry about that. Just make sure that each of the notes that you write out is correct according to the original example. That's why I ask you to write the notes underneath. It will help you to work through each example carefully. So let's go through the steps that you need to transpose carefully. Always the first step is to work out what the first note must be, either octave higher or an octave lower, depending on what the question asks. Okay? Always work out the first note. If the question asks that you need to take it into another clef, first work out what the note needs to be in the same clef that you started with. So if you started in the treble clef, transpose the note down or up in the treble clef. Then take it into the bass clef. Okay? That will make sure that you've got the right note. It's very important to start on the right note, because then if you start on the right note, it's most likely that you will get all of the other notes right. The second step is to write out the notes or the names of the notes under each note. Okay? So that you know exactly what it is. In this case, and you'll see if you look at the screen now that I've done that, there's an example of it. And then after you've written out the notes, one by one, write each note out individually in its new position. If it's up an octave, take it to its new position in the stave. If it's down an octave, take it into its new position in the stave. If you do all of those things step by step, transposition should be very simple for you. And that's where we end this lesson.